Hello and welcome to the 49ers First and 10 podcast. 10 minutes of the most up-to-date 49ers news, first thing in the morning. I'm your host, Brianna McDonald, and I'm joined by 49ers team reporter, Lindsay Polares. The San Francisco 49ers are wrapping up a limbo week before the regular season starts. It's like preseason week 4, or some call it week 0, but just as promised, some roster moves came following the announcement of the initial 53-man roster. 2 players were signed to one-year deals and 2 others were placed on injured reserve. Lindsay, could you tell us a little bit more about what went on there?
Yeah, so I think it's exactly what we heard from head coach Kyle Shanahan and general manager John Lynch. The initial 53 is just that, the initial roster, and there's been, like you mentioned, a couple of changes already. So it's wide receiver Danny Gray and defensive lineman Robert Beal Jr. that will be going on injured reserve. That opened up 2 places. So the 49ers signed defensive lineman Kerry Hyder Jr. and Austin Bryant to one-year deals. And then we have, of course, the practice squad, which is 16 players, but we will get to that in a second.
Yeah, on Wednesday, the 49ers practice squad was also announced. The team has a total of 16 players in this group, an upgrade from the 2020 COVID season. Lindsay, would you like to take us through this list?
Yes, I got them. So this is a long list, so everybody buckle up. Defensive lineman Alex Barrett, fullback Jack Coletto, wide receiver Chris Conley, defensive lineman Marlon Davidson, tight end Troy Fumagalli, offensive lineman Alfredo Gutierrez. However, he's a part of the International Pathway Program, so actually doesn't count against that 16-player limit. Running back Brian Hill, cornerback Quantrez Knight, offensive lineman Corey Luciano, wide receiver Tay Martin, defensive lineman T.Y. McGill, linebacker Curtis Robinson, wide receiver Willie Snead IV, cornerback Trey Swilling, offensive lineman Leroy Watson IV, wide receiver Isaiah Winstead, and then we also have a cornerback Gene Charles.
Nice. Are you out of breath yet?
Yeah, that's a lot of names.
So let's talk about the value and importance of the practice squad. The team uses this group not only to develop players, but also hold battle-tested veterans. General manager John Lynch gave a great example with the wide receiver position with players like Chris Conley and Willie Snead IV, who are veterans that can set the tone. But then players like Tay Martin and Isaiah Winstead, who the team really wants to get more out of. Why should the faithful not overlook this squad? And how are these players used throughout the season?
Yeah, so the practice squad definitely is not something that should be overlooked because there's so much value, especially because of that expanded 16-player limit, that it's absolutely right. You can have your veterans on there, and you can also have your younger players that you're hoping to keep in the system for a prolonged period of time, develop, and one thing that general manager John Lynch said, pour into them. Make sure that that talent develops within the 49ers system, the 49ers way, and they learn the practices here and become, the next big player for this organization. I think just looking at this list, you don't have to look any farther than defensive lineman T.Y. McGill. He actually appeared in 12 games for the San Francisco 49ers last season, and that was after he appeared in time for that Week 6 game against the Atlanta Falcons. And then you look a little bit farther back to that, and you think of safety Tashawn Gibson, who is a very, very battle-tested veteran. He's entering his 12th season. He actually came to the 49ers at the end of August last season, started initially on that practice squad, and now is a starting safety for the organization. So again, do not overlook any of the players here. Also, with injuries, you never know who's going to be the next man up, and it will likely come from this list.
Here's head coach Kyle Shanahan and general manager John Lynch on the value of the team's practice squad.
Oh, yes. I think practice squads are one of the most important things in NFL building. And thank God we have 16 now instead of 10. That used to make it so much harder, but that's how you develop guys, and that's usually your third string. You got guys who you're one injury away and they're not on your practice squad anymore. It's really hard to just pull someone in off the street who's not on someone else's team to bring them in and get them ready on just a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday practice to play on Sunday. So you need guys that you're working with, guys you're developing, and especially once they've allowed us to put vets on the practice squad, that allows certain receivers, DBs, pass rushers, everyone to where they're just one injury away and they're going to be a big part of our team come week 1.
And then the thing is, these guys get flexed. It's not as if it's static. I mean, they got the opportunity to get flexed, and they will be. And so, I'm excited for those guys, and they share that excitement.
All right, so the season opener is right around the corner, and for some players, that means scaling back a bit in their workouts to make sure they're in good health for the 2023 campaign, and that includes tight end George Kittle and quarterback Brock Purdy this week. Can you explain what exactly scaling back means for these guys and what their practices look like?
Yeah, so I think it's a little different for both of the players that you mentioned. For quarterback Brock Purdy, it is exactly that, a scaling back. So we heard from head coach Kyle Shanahan that his rep count is roughly, he said not to quote him, but I am going to reference the number. He said about 700 reps or throws throughout practice in a week. That number is going to about 350 for this week of practice. So cutting that right in half. It's 0 week. There is no game to prepare for. So as part of a reset, this is what they're calling Brock Purdy's deloading week. And we heard both Lynch and Shanahan reference this was part of Purdy's plan to get back to regular season form following that UCL injury, post-surgery. So it sounds like this was already pre-planned, and it was just something that's been in the books, particularly for this week. And it really does make sense timing-wise because practice week for week 1 doesn't open up until Wednesday. You got a lot of time on your hands, so if there was a time to do this, it's right now. And then for tight end George Kittle, this is kind of a preventative scaling back. He's had some lingering issues from earlier in the preseason that kept him out of practice. So again, there's nothing to prepare for at this point. So if you're going to rest players, this is the time to do it. So I wouldn't expect George Kittle to be back in practice from what Kyle Shanahan said until next week.
All right, nice. So other than Brock Purdy and George Kittle, what do practices look out there with no game to prepare for this weekend?
Yeah, so on Thursday in particular, it was a lighter practice. It's been a very, very hot week. Nothing like what we saw in Vegas, but for the Bay Area, temperatures up pretty much around the board. But yeah, a lighter practice on Thursday, and then the players are expected to have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. They'll be back Monday for open locker room, and we'll get more of the practice schedule then. But for that now, that's what we know.
All right, well, that will do it for today. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for joining me in this preseason episode. Don't forget to follow First and 10 on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Turn on the notifications so you're in the know when we post any breaking news updates. And thank you, Faithful, for tuning in.